free public library outside of Boston, Massachusetts. Thank you all for being here tonight. Just going to let a few last minute stragglers join the call before we get started with our conversation. Thank you so much for being here on a snowy Boston evening. Hope everyone's staying warm. Hello from the Boston South End. Hello, Beth from the South End. All right. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. We're a few minutes into the hour. I'm sure we'll have more folks join us and they can pop in whenever they get the chance. My name is Emily again. I'm a reference librarian here at the Watertown Free Public Library in the Boston Metro West area. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping things. Again, we are in a webinar format tonight, so you can see me and our guest tonight, Barbara, but I cannot see or hear you. If for any reason you need closed captioning, this call is being closed captioned. You can find instructions for that in the chat that will be posted in just a moment. During this call, I see a lot of you have found the chat box. That's great. If you have any comments that are not questions, please put them in the chat. If you have a question for the author tonight, which I'm hoping that over half of this program will be questions fielded from the audience for the author, you can put any questions that you have for Barbara in the Q&A box, which is separate from the chat box. If you go down to the bottom of your screen on Zoom, you should see a Q&A option. That is where you should please put all of your questions. That's where I will be reading questions from. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A, not in the chat. If you have anything else to contribute that is not a question, please put it in the chat box. I'll be monitoring both, but we want your questions, please, in the Q&A. I would also really like to thank our partners for this event. We had about 170 people registered for this evening, and that couldn't be possible without all of the lovely institutions that we work with. I'd like to thank the Belmont Public Library, the Brockton Public Library, Oceanside Library in New York, the Charlotte and William Bloomberg Medford Public Library, the Wellesley Free Library, which is Barbara's home library. We're happy to have you. And a really special shout out to Mina Jane at the Carey Memorial Library in Lexington. She administrated this call this evening for us. She's hosting on her platform and streaming on Facebook. So thank you so much, Mina, for that. I really appreciate you. Okay, this also is being recorded and will be posted on several outlets afterwards. So if for any reason you would like to go back and view, it will be available for the future. Great, so tonight we are welcoming local author and luminary, Barbara Delinsky. Barbara is the author of more than 20 New York Times bestselling books and has been published in 28 languages worldwide. A lifelong New Englander, Delinsky earned a BA in psychology at Tufts University and a master's in sociology at Boston College. She currently still lives in Massachusetts with her husband, more books than she'll ever be able to read, 2 tennis rackets, and enough electronic devices to keep in touch with her children and their families. Please join me in welcoming Barbara. Barbara, we are so happy to have you. Thank you for being here. It's such a pleasure.
This is a delight. This is my dream. I mean, to be able to connect with readers from the comfort of my office. This is where we are right now is a pleasure, but it's a delight to be here. And thank you to all of the participant libraries. I'm very grateful.
Yeah, great. We're so thrilled that you could join us. So I have a few questions for you, and we'll open it up to Q&A from the audience because that's who we want to hear from. But before we get started, I just kind of wanted to ask about your formal education because it's not in writing. How did you come to write professionally, and what was your pathway to being a professional author?
Okay, well, I have to first tell you that when I was in high school, I was in an advanced placement English class and asked to leave because I couldn't keep up. I was just not doing as well as apparently some of the others. I don't know if any of those are published authors at this point, but what I write really is from the heart, which actually leads to the rest of my education. I got a degree in psychology and a master's degree in sociology because I love working with people. And in fact, that's kind of what my books do. They work with people. My strength is not prose. It is not, literary. I don't work in a literary genre, but what I write about are people's emotions. Now, let me backtrack a little bit. How did I get to be a writer? I think is what you're asking. I worked for a while in the field that I was trained at, and I was doing sociological research. I stopped work to have a child. And then as the mother of that child, I decided that I should teach myself how to take pictures, because the mother is the one who's at home with, in those days, the
Mm-hmm.
mother was the one who was at home with the kids. So I borrowed a single lens reflex camera from a brother-in-law, and I taught myself how to use it. Then I got so into it. And again, this is before we had SD cards. This was film that had to be developed. So I would rent darkroom space, and my husband was working for the government, so we were impoverished, and I was trying to pay rent to pay this darkroom space. In order to pay for that, I took a job at a local newspaper. We were living in Belmont, Massachusetts at the time. Hi, all from Belmont. And the newspaper had me taking pictures, but then writing up the articles to go with the pictures. So I actually discovered that I was better at writing up the articles than I was at taking the pictures. Then I had two more children, twins, who were a lot of work. So I was not doing a whole lot of photography at that point. But by the time they got to be approaching kindergarten, I wanted to be working, looking for jobs, didn't see anything in my field that I wanted. And I saw one day an article in the Boston Globe about women who wrote the category romance. Now, when I was growing up in Newton, in that advanced placement English class, we didn't read the Harlequin romance. That was not on the syllabus. But I was intrigued. There were three women who were profiled, and they each had different situations in life and seemed very interesting. So I went out and I read 30 or 40 of these books, sat down and wrote one, and it sold. And I think it was a question of my having the right manuscript in the right place at the right time. But that is basically how I got into writing. I then discovered that it was great fun. I mean, for me to be able to escape into my books is the same as readers escaping into books when they read, but writers do the exact same thing. And in fact, through this pandemic, my saving grace has actually been, I'm an early riser. So at 5 in the morning, 5:30 in the morning, I'm here at my computer focusing on my book, my next book. And that does keep me sane. It keeps me stable. So writing has come to mean the world to me, even though I did not grow up, so to speak, in that field. Now, I'll just say one other thing, and then you'll maybe ask something else. I took this fall, I love Zoom courses, and I took a course on Jane Austen. I had never read Jane Austen because I don't have a background in literature. I think I took one class in English in college, the required class, and that was it. I mean, I never dreamed that I would be a writer, but Jane Austen was terribly fun. It was great. So, and I do read a lot. So I certainly read now more than I ever did in college or when I had kids who were younger. So reading is a wonderful escape.
We have quite a few questions, both about what you are reading now and your new book, which we will be answering those. So thank you for all of you who have written in about that. You had mentioned growing up and going into high school in Newton, and you're a lifelong New Englander. I was wondering how that has affected your writing and work, and also how your mother has affected your writing and work, who passed away when you were younger. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. First, my mother. My mother died when I was 8 years old, and she had been sick for 5 years. So what this did, without going into detail about grief or anything else, I was forced, I think, to become very independent at an early age. I think that has informed my writing more than anything else. Well, the loss of a parent certainly will do it. I mean, there are other issues, raising my own children, how that has affected me. I'm so grateful to be, she died when she was 45, and I'm quite a bit older than that, and very, very grateful to be here and to have 9 grandchildren. So how lucky am I? You know, it just is amazing. Now, and I have been able to dedicate a book to each of those grandchildren, which has been double, not that I want them reading it at this, you know, at this point, but okay, so as far as New England goes, New England was part of my life growing up as well. I remember even before my mom died, her family was from Portland, Maine, and we used to spend time. My father had a sister up in Maine, and we would spend time there. Um, I have always loved New England. Maine has been, especially there, because I went to a summer camp for 7 years that it was 8 weeks every summer that was just fabulous. And it was all girls camp and sleep away, just remarkable experiences I had. So one of my earliest books was set in a summer camp, kind of like that. Okay.
Mhm.
But I have traveled around New England a lot. And when I was getting into writing, I got to know a lot of authors from other states. And I mean, there would be the authors from Texas, and they do Texas beautifully, and the ones from California, and they do California well. Well, you know, why would I want to write something set in their home state if I do New England so well, and they do their states so well, and they stick with their states? So what I do with my books is there's 6 New England states. I rotate so
Mm.
that when I'm thinking about the next book, I'll say, okay, the last book was Rhode Island. The one before that was Vermont. I actually go back and I see what, whose turn it is, which state's turn it is. I've also spent time in these states, so there's not a great deal of effort that I need to put into researching.
Mhm.
And I do, let me just say about researching. I mean, when I did set a few books in other states, researching back then, this is pre-internet. You know, now you Google, you go to Wikipedia, you get all kinds of information from Chamber of Commerce in 2 seconds. But in those days, I had to call on the phone, and 3 weeks later, maybe I would get material from a local Chamber of Commerce from, say, North Carolina. But I would spend hours in the library, which is doubly why I'm thrilled to be doing this event. I would spend hours and hours in the library doing research. Now, the library also was very meaningful to me, and I should have said this right at the get-go, because because my mother was sick for so long. I don't have too many memories of her, but one of those memories is going to a library. We lived in Newton, Massachusetts, going to a library in Newton Corner, which is no longer a library. I don't know what it is now, school administration building or something, but it was a big yellow Victorian house. And I remember, I mean, it was maybe 3 floors, and there were fire escapes on the outside. But there was that wonderful smell when you went inside, and they had bookmarks that had they were like textured pebbled paper that almost had a leathery feel, and they had the little cutout tongue so you could put that around the page that you were at. Libraries, going there with my mother, feeling that the whole world was open up to me in a library. They have always meant a lot to me. So I loved doing research in libraries. I kind of miss them now, but it's so easy to Google 100 times a day, you know?
Yeah, I hear that. So after you had established your career as a writer, can you tell me what your thought process was and how you reacted the first time you became a New York Times bestselling author?
Well, my career, okay, my career did not suddenly explode. My career has been for the last 40 years, building one reader at a time. Social media is this way, but every book that I've written, you know, it's every book has sold a little bit more than the one before it. And when I first was approaching the numbers that would get me onto the New York Times list, it was a concerted effort, my
Mhm.
talking with my publisher, making sure that we had the right book and the right cover. And I mean, that's all working together. You know, I write the book, they do the rest of it. But I do have a say as far as, no, this title does not work for me, or this cover does not work. We had the best possible setup and the numbers were there. And so the first time, I have to say, the first time I hit the New York Times list, it was at the same time the most exciting and the most anticlimactic event of my life. But you have to also understand, I'm not one who puts great stock in these things. This is not the meaning. I mean, I'm not going to put this on my gravestone someday. I'm not going to have it put there. What hitting the New York Times list, what that has enabled me to do is to write stories that I want, because publishers have more faith in me. It's not me saying to them, I hit the New York Times list, therefore you're going to publish this book. It's rather they're just having the faith that I know what I'm doing, because it's all about the reader. And that is why I'm thrilled to see 156 people here right now. When I get a chance to thank my readers, and I thank every single 157, I thank every single one of you. I mean, they're the ones, not me or the public, really, they're the ones who put me on the New York Times list. And the more I can hit that list, the more readers I can reach. That is what the list means to me.
Yeah, and I know that we have, and I was going to ask about, we have a lot of people asking in our Q&A about your next book. So would you mind sharing a little bit about what you're currently working on, and how
Well,
that kind of manifested?
it's very funny. I'll tell you just what and the thought process that went into that. Let me just say that I had the first 100 pages written to my satisfaction. Okay, there's some people who will write one draft and then they send it to their editor or agent or whatever, and they go over it, and then they go back and do a second draft and a third draft. I am very anal, and I don't want anybody to see my book unless I feel it's perfect. I felt that those 100 pages were perfect. I really liked them. But I had some qualms about the book. So I sent them Tuesday, 2 days ago. I sent all of a proposal, the 100 pages, to my agent, who has a fabulous person who she works with, who reads through. And I got a letter this morning that on one hand was the most complimentary. The first paragraph was totally complimentary. And then it went on to say, okay, this doesn't work. It goes through all of, I'm exaggerating, actually. I knew that I had problems. One of my situations, or one of the problems is I don't write psychological suspense. I don't write mysteries. It's wonderful. I wish I could be an author who wrote, who started a book off with a murder. It's just not what I do. Because if you have a murder, then you have to solve it. You know exactly what your active role is going to be in this book. But mine are more psychological. Okay, so what is this story about? I've been wanting to write this book for a long time. And the title came to me before anything else. And this, by the way, is not the title I'm going to use, but the title I wanted to write, or a book about, was The Curse of the Competent Woman. And I say this to all those women out there who maybe in the midst of this pandemic are wearing a gazillion hats, who are mother and worker, working remotely, trying to keep the kids in school, trying to keep everybody healthy, running to the supermarket. I am very bullish on women. I think women have really kept things going, and always do. We do a whole lot. The buck stops here. That was always my feeling as a mother, as a wife. I mean, I was kind of the one who had to make sure that everything was happening. And I became competent in lots of different things. The result being that sometimes I have to do everything, and I don't want to do everything. So what does a woman do when she's been very successful in life, when she's done everything, and then suddenly something happens and she doesn't know what to do? Either she develops a disease or something happens and she loses control. What is she going to do? Because people assume she's capable and competent and independent. And that, to me, is the curse of the competent woman. So the current book I'm writing is about a woman who actually was one of the founders of a startup that's kind of like a Wayfair type home interior furniture decorating place. And she peaks at 35, 40 years old. And now she's in her 50s and she's not sure what the next step is going to be. The business has been taken over by younger people. And she sold, I mean, she sold it and she's still maybe or not on the board. But she is just not sure where the next step in her life is taking her. At the same time, yes, she thinks that some of the physical things that she's feeling may or may not be Parkinson's disease. And that's throwing her off completely because she has no control over it. This is a woman who's always had control. So this is where I'm headed. Now, the location, when we talk about New England, okay, starting this book, I said, where have I not set a book? And I have lived all my life in Greater Boston, and I have never set a book in Boston.
Oh, wow.
I decided to do that. And I started and wrote the first maybe 30, 40 pages and then realized, oh, I don't want to be in downtown Boston every day. It was on the waterfront, on a little cafe on the waterfront and a boat on the waterfront. I mean, these were two basic locations in this story. I didn't want to go into Boston every day. And you have to understand that when I am writing a book, I am there every day. So that for A Week at the Shore, which is set in Rhode Island, I was there every single day. I was feeling it. I mean, you feel the weather, you feel the sunrise and the sunset. I did not want to be in downtown Boston. Where did I want to be? I wanted to be on the coast of Maine. Again, because A, I hadn't done it in a long time, but B, Maine means a whole lot to me. It also has come to mean a lot to my family because we've had some big celebrations. My husband's big birthday for my husband at places in Maine. And we often have gone, my husband and I, to vacation, a weekend in Maine. We do day trips. One of our favorite places is Perkins Cove in Maine, and that's maybe an hour and a quarter for us to drive to. And, it breaks my heart now because we're not going there because of the pandemic. I mean, I think there are some eateries open, although I'm not sure what at this point, what the quarantine regulations are, whether we're even able to enter Maine legally, so to speak. I, of course, would obsess about the bathroom. Do I want to go into a public bathroom? So, we're not going to Maine yet, pretty soon maybe. But in my mind, every day, when I come to my computer at 5:30, I am on a little point of land right near Kennebunkport, Cape Porpoise. I don't know if any of you listening are from Maine, but Kennebunkport is a favorite of ours. And just north of there, you got, I think it's part of Kennebunkport, Cape Porpoise. But there I am. That's where and it just is wonderful. And I've got a French cafe there. I've got my main character who's in her 50s, and I've got her aunt who is in her 70s. And I have other characters who I think are going to be very emotionally relatable to my readers. And that really is what it's about. I need to find situations and characters that my readers can relate to.
I think a lot of people can relate wanting to be on the shore of Maine right now, outside of the city.
Oh my goodness, yes. Yes. I found myself even on Instagram posting a photograph. It wasn't Maine, it was actually Puerto Rico, where we were 4 years ago today. We were there actually 2 years ago also, but I had a wonderful picture. And I said in the caption, don't you really just want to be here? And to me, a lot of life, because of what I do, writing fiction, is imagination. So a lot of life is just picturing yourself there, whether it's me picturing myself in Maine, on Cape Porpoise, on this little piece of land. I actually call this piece of land Puffin Point because puffins are alleged to land there. I don't know if anybody knows about puffins. I mean, they're beautiful birds. They're just beautiful. They do nest on there are 2 islands off the coast of Maine, 6-7 miles offshore, where they nest. And they do occasionally maybe pass by land. I'm going to pretend for the sake of this book, and it's fiction, so I can do what I want, that once in a while they land on this point.
Mm.
But that's why it's called Puffin Point. I love being the, whether it's a picture of Puerto Rico or that, right now we need to escape to these places.
Yeah, lots of people are commenting about your Instagram, so I'll ask about that as well. Kristen is asking how long it takes for you to write one of your books, since you had mentioned getting feedback from your publisher 100 pages in.
Well, I used to write when I started writing, believe it or not, when I was writing romances, and what I write now is, I don't consider it a romance. A romance is 80% love story and 20% something else. This is generally speaking. What I write may be 20% or 30% romance, and then other issues. I always put an issue into my book. I used to spend back then, and they were smaller books too. I used to spend a month writing a book, a month. I would write it in a month. I would then cleanse the palette for 2 weeks and then start the next one. So there were a few
Yeah.
years when I actually wrote 8 books. I mean, you do the math and it works out. Then I got down to 1 book a year, which was what I wanted to have my publisher publish. And now, to tell you the truth, it takes me 2 to 3 years to do a book, because there's so much more at stake. I work harder on every book because I want each one to be better than the last. I also have written yes, it's over 20 New York Times bestsellers, but it's also over 80 books all told published.
Wow.
So, I mean, what is new under the sun when you've written that many books? I need to try to be current, and I need to do research to find something that I have not yet written about, because I do not want to keep writing the same book over and over again. So it does take me a while. This book is 100 pages in. I'm guessing it'll take me another year to finish.
Several people are asking, since you write so much, if you have a favorite book that you've written. I have to imagine that's probably a hard call for you to make.
It is impossible, and I won't even try it. It's like asking me which of my children are my favorite.
Yeah.
You can't do that, because you love every single one of them. You love them for different reasons. And I think books are that way. I loved Shades of Grace because it dealt with Alzheimer's disease, and an aunt who helped raise me after my mother died suffered from that and subsequently died of it. So that book meant a lot to me. I loved Coast Road. And there's an interesting story. Okay, Coast Road, I decided I wanted to write a book about a book club and the different members of a book club. And my agent said to me, Barbara, for marketing purposes, why don't you set it outside New England? So my husband and I at that point had been spending a lot of time in Big Sur, California. We would go out there for a week and we would hike. We loved it. I mean, that too, during this pandemic has been amazing, just walking around when it's not too icy or snowy or whatever. So we go out to California. I said, okay, I'll set a book group in San Francisco. I researched San Francisco. My husband and I were planning a trip out there, and I went 3 or 4 days ahead of him and got people to drive me around, whatever. Well, the bottom line was I hated San Francisco. All I remember of it really, I mean, it was lovely, I'm sure, but he was not there with me, which is one of the reasons probably why I didn't enjoy it. But I remember homeless people. So I came home, we spent our week of vacation. I came home, revamped that story to take place really in Big Sur, Monterey, completely not, and the book group was in it, but had a much smaller role. And that was actually my first hardcover to hit the New York Times bestselling list. And it just worked. It worked. The cover worked. The title worked. Everything about it worked. Now, so I love that because of the location. I love Flirting with Pete because of the characters involved. And I had actually written a novella that was based on. And I remember when I finished the novella, I gave it to my agent and my editor. And my editor was very diplomatic and said, someday maybe you'll want to do something with this, but I don't think that it's really quite good for what you're doing now. Well, what I needed to do was to take that novella and fit it into a bigger story, which is what I did. And it was so gratifying to do it. I loved doing that. But you see, I mean, I can go through every one of my books and tell you why I love that book, but I can't pick a favorite. And nor can my readers, you know, this is, you know, to all of you readers there, you know, if you ever are worried about saying, well, I liked your new book, but my favorite was, I mean, that's great. My dad had an expression, that's why they have menus in restaurants. And you have a right to pick and choose what you want to eat or what you want to read. So I'm just thrilled as long as you keep reading.
We have several people chiming in the chat right now saying Coast Road, always my favorite. Shades of Grace, wow, such a great one. Speaking of things that people are devouring all the time, a lot of folks here would like to know what you are reading right now and who some of your favorite authors are.
Well, I don't have favorite authors. Let me just say that right off the bat. I have books that I've loved. What am I reading right now? We'll start and then kind of work backwards. I had just finished reading The Splendid and the Vile. And I do, by the way, review these books and put those reviews on my website if anybody's interested. I did that. I'm in a book group and we were reading that book, and it was such a difficult book. It's a long book. It's nonfiction about Winston Churchill and the year May of 1940 to May of 1941. So we're talking World War II. And I struggled for the first half of the book, and then it so caught on that I just loved it, loved the end. So that was good. What am I reading right this minute? I've just, well, not right this minute, obviously, but I've just started something called A Piragon, which is a story of two fathers in the Middle East, one Israeli and one Palestinian, both of whom lose daughters. One daughter's 10, one's 14, to violence that takes place there. And I'm just getting into it. I can't tell you more of what it had been recommended to me. I'm also listening. I have 3 books going at once. One is a physical book that I'm holding. One is an Audible. I love Audible. I started listening to audiobooks because I felt that I wanted to train my ear, train myself to focus. It was not up until that point normally is auditory. I'm not sure what the proper word is, but I wasn't a listening kind of person. I needed to see the words. But I decided, okay, I'm going to, and I was spending enough time in the car. At that point, we had a place in New Hampshire, and it would be, you know, 4 hours of driving every week. And that's not counting anything that was in between things, you know, an hour back and forth to tennis kind of thing. And so at any given time I'm listening, and I'm currently listening to something called Summer Water, which the reader is Scottish, or at least is speaking in a Scottish accent. It takes place in Scotland, very short. It's really a novella, and it's beautifully, beautifully written. At night, okay, that's when I hold my Kindle. So I really do use all these formats. And what do I do at night? At night is really just to relax. I have just finished the last Bridgerton book. After loving the TV show, I've now read all 8 of the books. So I'm a little bit at wit's end here. I did start something else last night that wasn't quite the same.
Bridgerton, taking the world by storm.
Yes, yes.
And on TV.
I know. But, you know, so some of the best books I've read, or some of the ones, not the best, some of the ones I've thoroughly enjoyed. There's one called Miss Benson's Beetle, which is written by Rachel Joyce, who I do enjoy. And I've read I've read others of her books, and that was wonderful. I'm trying to think of some of the others. Ask another question and I'll come up with other ones that I've just recently. And of course, Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility and Persuasion. And I mean, Jane Austen, what a wonderful time that was to be able to read. I mean, after all this time, I'm embarrassed not having read Jane Austen. And then there are some wonderful spin-offs, not spin-offs, but the Jane Austen Society, which is a terrific book. And I read it before I had taken the course in which I was reading Jane Austen. but I try to read different things. I try to read both what's current now. I did get to read American Dirt when it was in advanced reader
Mhm.
copy stage before it came out. So that was, I was privileged to do that. Um, but I try to read memoirs. I try to read a variety.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I think each one of them has an effect on my writing in odd kinds of ways.
There are a lot of people chiming in the chat right now saying, never read Jane Austen, totally gonna give it a try, love Pride and Prejudice. As a librarian, I feel like I'm biased, but in my opinion, Jane Austen is better late than never. As the Bronte sisters, please read them. They're all fantastic. Um, we have a question, well, we have a lot of questions coming in from Teresa. She is in Lexington and she would like to know, what is the best piece of writing advice that you received that you still use today?
Uh, well, I guess, there's the old one that is write about what you know, which
Hmm.
worked for me for a long time and then didn't because I ran out of things I knew. It's the problem I was discussing before, that after 80 books, I mean, you struggle to find new things. So what I do is learn. And let me just uh, get off on a side thing for a minute. On Instagram, I mean, people we'll talk about that later at some other point, but I do spend a lot of time now writing the captions, which I think my readers love to read. And I'll try to point out, even about a particular kind of flower, some little detail that they did not know, that I did not know until I did the research. So I love learning about new things. That is crucial to my own well-being. So what other message? I can't, I've really been a very self-contained writer. I don't uh, uh, get, this sounds strange, but I don't get advice from people too often. There were editors probably are the ones who affect me most. And one of my editors, and I'll never forget this, she said, don't use 3 adjectives when one is good enough. It's kind of like if you look at what's behind me, I don't want to show you that. It's distracting, isn't it? Okay, so why would I want to use 3 adjectives, which people then stumble over? Which one are they going to glom onto? I would much rather use just one. And I sometimes work hard to do that. The other piece of advice that I got, which really means a lot to me, is to give each character something, whether it is a twitch or a kind of earrings they wear or bangs that they have, something that is unique to that character. And you have to be careful not to repeat it constantly, but I think that it's a good lesson to be learned.
Yeah. Um, so speaking of your Instagram, because we've mentioned it a few times now, and we've had a lot of people chime in both in the chat and on the Q&A. People love your social media. They love your Instagram posts. They love seeing your hobbies and your photos. Can you talk a little bit more about your interaction with social media, why you like posting on social media, how you came to start doing that? People are saying, we love seeing your knitting projects. We love all of the photos that you post. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because people seem to really love it.
Oh, the knitting projects. Oh my goodness, I haven't done that in a while, and I feel badly about that. And I won't go into the reasons why I'm not knitting right now, but Instagram, okay, social media, that came, well, we all know how relatively recent that is. And
Mhm.
I felt very strongly at the beginning that readers, for example, and what I'm doing is writing books for readers. Readers want a book. They don't want to be limited to 140 characters. Now, I think that Twitter is now you can do twice as many as that. I think that's true.
Yeah.
But so I avoided social media for a long time. And then I somehow realized that it could help me because especially if I wanted to reach readers easily, the Postal Service just wasn't doing it.
Mhm.
In 2007, I did my last author tour. I won't do those again because my readers they'll come to an event like this,
Mhm.
but they're not going to come out at night. I remember once, that last time I went to uh, uh, Economawalk, I think the name of it was, Wisconsin. It was an hour north of Milwaukee. It was in February, because this was for Family Tree, which came out in February of 2007. I got to the event and the bookseller said, "Oh, I'm really sorry, but you know, it's cold out and people didn't want to come out." I think there were 10 people there. Um, well, I come from Boston, and you know, it's not, I mean, we get 14-degree weather there too, and people will still go out. But at any rate, I just, social media is such a wonderful way to relate to people. Instagram for me has been almost a dream come true, because I love photos. When I started it, I said to anybody who would listen, I have so many photos. I mean, on my phone, I haven't got my phone here, on my phone, on this computer, on all of my devices, I have all of my photos. I have over 65,000 photos on my phone right now. And every time I get a new phone, it gets transferred, because I keep using those in different things, whether it's Instagram or something else. And by the way, let's get back, remind me to talk about Instagram. But first of all, I need to do this. Okay. You all see this cover, A Week at the Shore. Well, it's backwards, but imagine it forward. We struggled finding a cover for that book. My publisher came up, the art department came up with 100, literally 100 different designs, and none of them felt right. Now, before that happened, when I had finished writing the book, my editor had said, "Do you have photographs from," it was set in Rhode Island, where we have some very fond memories of family vacations, vacations that my husband and I have shared, you know, just ourselves. But she said, "Would you send us some of your pictures, because the photographer, the art department will then get a feeling for where this book is set." They came up with a gazillion different kinds of things, some of which I liked, but somebody always in the publishing house did not. If, you know, when I liked something, they didn't. So anyway, we finally ended up, the picture on this book, the art on this, is one of my photographs.
Wow.
So, and it actually says so inside. It's the only time that I've been credited.
I was gonna
Now,
ask, is that the only time that that's happened?
yes, and I don't think it will ever
In
happen
all
again.
these years?
But it was so, I mean, they modified it, you know, they added a little, the fencing at the bottom, but it really felt so good. Now, as far as Instagram goes, okay, so I do have all of these photos, and people seem to enjoy them. And if they enjoy them, I'm going to keep putting them on. Now, I also have a setup here in my office. I won't turn the whole screen to show you, but I have a light box, which is basically a, well, can I turn the screen? Do you all see that white thing right over there?
Mhm.
Okay, that's a light box, and it enables me to put something inside, say an apple. I can put it, or a flower. I can put it inside the light box, and there are lights, built-in LED lights. I can put them on a dimmer. I can turn them on and off, whatever. So I can photograph it with very controlled lighting. I play with different lenses. Now I've just been playing with something called the Lens Baby, which means that I can keep one thing in focus and other things are not in focus. And my readers seem to love these. Now, for Valentine's Day, I decided, you know, in this pandemic, one day of flowers is not enough. So I posted a picture of flowers every single day, one flower every single day. And then, of course, last Sunday, I did red roses, which personally I thought were the more boring of, I mean, I'm not a red rose fan, but I love posting those things. I have waiting actually to post later this week a photo of a cardinal that I took outside. My husband went out the other morning to get the newspaper and said, "Oh my gosh, here is a sign of spring. You have to come and look." I came and looked and I said, "Sweetheart, a cardinal is not a sign of spring. They're around here all winter and we see them all winter, you know? It's the robin that is the sign of spring." But I went and got my camera and I had a long lens on it. So I think I extended it to 230 millimeters. And then the problem is making it stable so it doesn't shake. So I was leaning up against the wall in the garage looking at this, and I actually got one that I wish the Cardinal had given me a little bit more of his profile. But if I needed to get one that was really in focus, and the raindrops on the branches that he's sitting on were in focus. So I will post that later. But I love Instagram. I mean, it is just great fun. Does it sell books? I don't really care.
Well, I think it's bringing a lot of people joy during the pandemic.
Yeah.
That's what it seems like in the comments, and I've noticed that as well when I go on Instagram. Um, Speaking of things that you love to do, since you're so enthusiastic, you're a very busy woman besides writing. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you like to do in your spare time? A lot of folks are wondering that in the questions and in the chat. What do you do when you're not writing or taking photos?
Okay, well, years ago, when I first started writing, I was at a live event and I was asked that question. At that point, I was writing the 8 books a year, and it was just continual. And I had 3 young children at home, and they said, "So what do you do when you're not writing?" And I said, "Laundry." I mean, that was what I had to do.
Yeah.
What do I do now? Well, there are lots of things. Reading is a priority for me, because I never really took the time when I was writing those book after book after book. I really couldn't read much because I had to focus on my own book. And I was worried that I would start writing in someone else's voice. Now I'm thrilled if I start writing in someone else's voice, because it just gives me variety. It always ends up in my own voice. But so I read a lot. That's very important. In the pandemic, I've actually been doing a lot of jigsaw puzzles as I listen to books on Audible, which is a great fun thing to do. I take pictures. I spend a lot of time with physical exercise. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it is sanity. And every morning I spend half hour to an hour on the phone talking with my sister. And that is great fun. We're both walking around. We can vent about whatever in the news is upsetting or whatever. So I'll walk then, but my husband and I also will go out for 3-mile walks during the day. And we'll sometimes do that. I mean, it's been very snowy here, but we go unless it's really inhibitive, unless, like tomorrow, I think it's going to be icy and wet here. We're getting this sleet now. But we have things that you put on the bottom, crampons you put on the bottom of your boots. So you're basically, trekking like we would. Oh, and by the way, we also travel. This is what I love doing in my free time. Now, obviously, have not done it for a year. The best timing of my life has to be the trip that we returned from just a year ago, right before everything closed down. We went to Antarctica.
Wow.
Now, we hit Antarctica at a time when it was unseasonably warm. I mean, it's terrifying because it's unseasonably warm a lot there now, and the icebergs are melting and breaking apart, and the ice flows and what have you. But it was an amazing trip. We had all of this equipment that, walking sticks and stuff. We didn't have to use much of that because it really was not all that cold. We use it now. We're using it now when we go outside because it's been so cold here on some days. But even there are days when it's been 17, 18, 19 degrees, and we just bundle up and go because it's sanity. We can't go out to a restaurant. We're not even comfortable yet going to a mall to walk. So we can't walk inside. Although I have to say today, when we walked, we were walking on pavement, and we live in an area where there are lots of streets that are not heavily trafficked. So I'm very fortunate in that sense, but I wore sneakers today, not my walking boots, not boots with clamps and cleats and stuff. I wore my sneakers, and boy, did I feel like $1,000,000. I mean, I could have just danced, it was so light. I mean, to think of wearing sneakers or flip-flops would be fabulous, but I do a lot in that sense. I try to keep in touch with friends. I mean, that also at this stage in my life has been meaningful. One of the things about this book I'm writing now, my character is 55, has been so busy between raising a set of twins, being a wife to her husband, and being the CFO of a business, a very demanding startup. She never had time to make friends. And suddenly at 55, when she feels like she could use a friend, she doesn't have one. Well, this is really where I identify with this, because I work in solitude. A writer works in an office. You see my office here. What you're not seeing on the opposite wall, and I won't turn the computer around, are all the bookshelves with both my books and books that either I want to read or ones that I have already read. But oh, I just totally lost my train of thought. What was I? Oh, yes. So what was I was talking about what I'm doing. No, I lost my train of thought. You're going to have to remind me what I was in the middle of saying.
About how you keep in touch with folks to stay busy, since it's important.
Yes, friends. That's friends to do with my new book. I am in much the same way. I much the same as my main character. I mean, there are many parts of me that are in every single book I write. So you can ask me, you can pinpoint a book and say, where are you in that book? And I'll tell you. I actually have a friend who reads my books, and she'll say, I know exactly what's going on in your life right now. She knew me as a kid anyway, but I like to keep in touch with friends because I let friendships go. When I was working, sitting here in my office all alone, working whenever my kids were out of the house, whenever my husband was working, and then as soon as they came home and the kids, would come home from school, I couldn't work. So, I mean, that was my day. I really never had time for friends. So I'm making time now. That's important to me. In the day when we could meet for lunch, I mean, that's one, that was wonderful. I meet a friend for walking whenever I can to walk. And I mean, it's the social thing. What do I do in terms, I mean, I am not doing any knitting now. Um, I, I think, photography is really, there's been a resurgence of that, and it can be very time consuming. So I spend a lot of my free time on that. And then I just kind of sometimes need to veg, and I never allowed myself to do that, just to
Well,
sit and relax.
now I feel like we all have a lot of time to do that during the pandemic. Barbara, you mentioned that a lot of times you put a lot of yourself in your main characters. Do you ever put other people from your real life in your books?
I try not to. Thank you for asking me that, so that if anybody has ever met me in person and thinks that they're in my book, please. I don't have that good a memory, for one thing. What happens is there may be, remember I said earlier that I was taught that you remember one thing about you write one thing about a person, either one character who's always wearing big pearl earrings. That was the example given by this person who helped me learn this. But I definitely put people in my books who are I not specific people, but characteristics of them, whether it's the pearl earring or the glasses you're wearing, Emily, or the way your hair is, Emily, or your blouse, Emily. I mean, nothing, you're never going to be able to recognize anybody in my book that might be you. But one little thing, I mean, this is just, you meet people, and you take away a little something from everybody, so that any character in a book is an amalgam of different people I've met in my life. And then maybe throw in a little bit of imagination to people I might have wanted to meet, might want to talk to. So there you go.
We are getting so many positive comments here. Thank you all for writing in. We only have a couple of minutes left, and all of these questions and comments will be sent to Barbara after, just so you know. But I guess in conclusion, 2020 has been a really interesting year. Do you have any reflections on the past year for anyone listening, and maybe hopes for the future year? I know I have to say personally that I met Barbara digitally, and she is such a wonderful soul. And so that's been one of the highlights of my year, 2020. But do you have anything that you can share with the readers, everyone who's here to listen?
Well, I mean, the only thing I can say, and I, I said before how grateful I am to be living at the age that I am. I think back, as difficult as isolating as times were, I think back to Anne Frank, for example, and Nazi Germany, and a lot of a lot of people have it worse than we do. The other thing I realize is that, I mean, everybody in their life goes through difficult periods, um, but times change. We get past them, and I find, for me, I mean, I'm very lucky because I was able to write all the way through the pandemic, and it didn't change a whole lot of my daily life, because I did work at home for starters, and I do work alone, and I'm good by myself. But in terms of not being able to go out and travel and do the things that I really want to do that we used to do, I know that will come again. And I think that's the only thing I can say to people. I think you have to be optimistic. Life, I'm not sure we're going to go back to the same normal we had, but the new normal, I hate that expression, but it does fit, you know, will be every bit as meaningful, I think, as the old one. And you just have to go with the flow. It's kind of like I'm telling my character in this book. And by the way, the title of the book currently is Grace. That's the character's name, Grace at Dawn, because there'll be a photograph, a beautiful photograph taken by one of the other characters of her at dawn, on the rocks up there in Maine. But also dawn is the beginning of her new life, at age 55. And I say to her, you know, things will get better. You'll see your way through. This is going to, we always have to move on and reinvent ourselves. And this is what I say to people who are down about the pandemic. We will get through this. So, you know, I just want everyone to stay well until we do.
Oh, well, that's such a great sentiment. Thank you so much, Barbara.
Thank
We have tons of still open questions, which we can't get to this evening, but thank you for writing in. And lots of folks saying, just started following you on Instagram. Thank you so much for sharing. Love your optimism. I did want to mention that Barbara's last book is coming out in paperback. Can you talk just a little bit about that before we close up?
Yes, May 25th. This book will be out in trade paperback, and actually trade paperback is one of my favorite editions, because it is lightweight and it's a good big print, and it's just, I happen to like holding it. But it's the same book that you had in the hardcover, but at a much more reasonably priced price. So I will be talking about that as I approach May 25th, on all of my social media. And I do, by the way, as far as social media goes, I do Twitter and I do Facebook. Instagram's my favorite because of the photographs. But so all of those will carry notice about my new book. And thank you for mentioning that, though, Emily.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for being here tonight, Barbara. It's been such a pleasure.
My joy. Thank you.
Of course. I
And
guess. Yeah.
just thank you. I want to thank all of the people who have been here and have listened to me. It really, this is what makes my career worthwhile. This is what makes writing books worthwhile, is knowing that people read them and knowing that you can, you know, touch people in some way, shape, or form. So thank you all for coming and for reading.
So much. Thank you so much. We love your books. You're such a delightful human being. Thank you very much for this evening. Oceanside Library, New York says thank you. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in from Boston and elsewhere. Saw we had someone from England here as well. So thank you so much, Barbara. This concludes the webinar. I will stay on just for a couple more seconds to let people sign off.